broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to IASET's Professional Development webinar series. Today's topic is 3 secrets to designing effective job aids. Our speaker today will be Katie Flanagan from Mimeo, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to participants within 48 hours on our website under Archived Webinars. Since all phone lines will be muted throughout today's presentation so that there are no interruptions, if you have a question, please type it into the questions field in the icon box. The questions will come to us and we will be able to address them throughout the webinar. Keep in mind, you will also receive a link to a survey evaluation after the webinar has ended. We would appreciate any feedback as it not only provides insight for IASET staff, but also for our webinar presenters. And now for our webinar, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter, Katie Flanagan. Katie is Marketing Manager at Mimeo, the print solution for business trainers. For this webinar, she draws on Mimeo's experience printing job aids for hundreds of trainers every day to identify best practices and a few wrong turns to avoid. So without further ado, Katie, I will pass the presentation on to you and you can take it away.
Thank you so much, Alexa, and thank you everyone for taking the time today, or maybe you're joining on demand in the future, so thank you in the future for joining us. I'm really excited to be here today and speak to the IASET community. We've gotten to participate with you guys in a conference so far, and I'm looking forward to becoming even more of a partner to the IASET community. So I want to start with just a little bit of, why I'm here, and then I would like to hear a little bit about why you're here, and then we'll take it from there. So I'm the gal in the circle here. I'm Katie Flanagan. I'm a marketing manager at Mimeo. So why on earth am I talking to you about job aids? So as Alexa mentioned, Mimeo is a print and content distribution solution. So we work with over 1,500 training teams across the world, including companies like Richardson, Kindred Healthcare, RA Sushi, Raw Sushi, Blackbaud, so across multiple industries, multiple company sizes, and we see lots of different types of training content come over across our desks. And specifically, there are lots of job aids that people need to produce for all sorts of different contexts. So as a company, we see a lot of content, and we have some thoughts that we've collected over the last 20 years on best practices for creating content that's effective. The reason I'm the one here is because I run our monthly webinar series that is for trainers. It's been going on for almost 5 years now. We cover lots of different topics, including things like tips for translating your content, how to use PowerPoint as a trainer, and designing your training handouts. So from being a part of the webinar series for 5 years, I've learned by osmosis a lot of best practices, both for presentation and design of job aids and other training materials. So the short answer is we see a lot of content, we see what works, we see what doesn't work, and we want to share those learnings with you guys. So with that in mind, I would love to hear what brings you to this webinar. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to learn about it, and I'd just like to learn, what's the primary function that's bringing you to learn about designing effective job aids? I know this question can be a little tricky. It's going to be a poll question that pops up. And sometimes it can be a little tricky. I know we do research every year, and one of the primary pieces of data that we get is that trainers are never solving just one problem. Even if your title says you're an instructional designer, you might be doing instructional design plus training. Or if your title is training, you might be doing instructional design plus facilitation plus managing. So the question might feel a little complex. But I would love to learn, what is the primary function that you consider to be your role or that's bringing you to learn about job aids? So we're going to pop that poll up for you to go ahead and answer.
And participants, this is a live poll, so you can actually click on the option that you would like to select and your vote will be submitted. So go ahead and read through the question and submit your vote on the screen. We are seeing the percentages come in as you all are voting. We'll give it about 5 more seconds, and then we will close the poll and share the results. All right, we're going to close the poll now, and let's see what results we have. Katie, can you see those percentages on the screen?
I can, yeah, that's great. So we've got about half of you are instructional designer and half of you are combo, which I get. I feel ya. So thank you for sharing that with me. I think that helps us think about, what perspective we're bringing to the table here. So next, I just want to make sure that we, start off the conversation all on the same page about, what even is a job aid. So the academic definition that I got from Rossett and Gautier Downs, is a little jargon heavy, but it's a repository that supports work activity. The way I think about it is the job aid helps your learners do their work, and you could even add in here at the moment when they're actually doing that work. So, that could be a reference sheet. It could be step-by-step instructions. It could be job station signs. It could be a pocket guide. There are lots of different options of what a job aid might look like. I was actually telling my mom about this webinar that I was doing, and she said, I've never even heard of a job aid, because she's not in the training world. And so I was explaining it to her, and she was like, oh, I saw a flight attendant recently reading off a laminated card. I was like, yes, that's a perfect example. So that's how I define a job aid. I'd love to hear from you, what does a job aid look like at your organization? So you can type into the questions pane, a little bit about what job aids look like for you. So to give you an example, at Mimio, we kind of have we have lots of learning populations, but examples from 3 different learning populations. Our sales team, there's a pocket-sized book that they get to refer to on calls for how to structure their conversations. So that's a little more of a complex reference for them to get. There are multiple sheets. They can kind of like thumb over to the page that's appropriate to them, but it's something that sits on their desk and is easy for them to access at the moment that they need it. At our print facilities, we put up posters and little signs at different workstations so that the press operators can quickly refer to, like, what's the next step and what I need to do. And then in terms of customer training, we provide customers with printed quick guides as reminders on, like, how to run certain reports, or, if they need a complex document, or, just something that is a little more complex than the average, place order. We'll provide them with some quick guides that they can keep at their desk. And usually that's a one-sheeter, but again, it might be something that is multiple pages. So, in terms of what job aids look like at your organizations, I think there's a wide variety. So if you type those in, we'll go ahead and share that after the session so that we can all continue the conversation. So I'm going to get to the 3 secrets, I promise. But first, I wanted to borrow from yoga to make sure that we all get as much out of today as we can. So to borrow from yoga, let's set an intention for why you're here, why you're listening to me, and what you're going to get out of it. So I'd love for everyone to just kind of take a moment. You can close your eyes, you can write into the questions pane, you can grab a piece of paper and jot down your answer, whatever works for you. We're not going to necessarily share it with the class. But, just let's set an intention, visualize the job aid that you want to improve. Pick one, or maybe pick a series of job aids, whatever works for you. Think about right now in its current state, how do you use it? Who are your learners? What are the learning objectives or tasks that it's supporting? And how are they accessing it? How is it handed out? How is it posted? How do they get it? So those are just some base questions to keep in mind so that as we go through the 3 secrets, you can think about that specific job aid and how you might improve it. So with that, let's get to the main event, the 3 secrets that we have for designing effective job aids. Everything is cuter with little animals. That's not a secret, that's just fun. So my number 1 tip is keep it relevant. I don't think I need to tell anyone on this call that your job aid needs to tie back to your overall learning objectives. That's, I think everyone knows that. But I think relevancy also means thinking about the context in which your learner is going to need this job aid. What are they going to be doing before and after? Where are they going to be? Who are they? And, are they going to have access to a computer? Are they going to have access to printed documents? Are they going to be standing in the rain? All of that is really important to making sure that your job aid is going to solve their or answer their question at the time that they need it. So a couple of examples that are on the screen. On the right hand, you see, this is actually from our Memphis print facilities. You can see there are a couple of different job aids. There's the one behind the computer that's the full workflow, and then on the computer there are some little signs that are reminding the operator of what they need to do next to make sure that they're following the appropriate processes. I also wanted to share the example on the left, and these examples actually come from a session we did at ATI, so Brian Washburn from Endurance Learning gets credit for the one on the left. But it is, it's an example of consumers needing some job aids on how to actually access your cookies. Sometimes you don't see that tear, and so you're struggling. I've done it a lot, struggling to open my cookie bag. So when they add, that little tear here, that's an example of a very simple job aid that's helping me get the job done of accessing my cookies. So easy to say, keep it relevant. How do you actually achieve that? Connie Malamed is a great instructional design guru. She has a really great blog if you haven't come across it before. And by the way, we do have a handout in the handout section you can download that has links to all of the sources and everything that I'm talking about today. It also has a little area for you to take notes if you want to take notes. So feel free to download that. And this will take you to the blog post that I'm referencing. But she has this great blog post that's on the types of analysis you need to do for your learning. And one type of analysis is audience analysis. So she has all sorts of questions she recommends that you ask to understand who your audience is. It ranges from the basics of, what are their ages? What are their genders? What kind of experience do they have in the role that they're in? How often is there a new person coming in needing to reference this job aid? What language do they speak? Do you need to provide it in multiple languages? If you're considering something that's more of a digital asset, do they have access to computers? How comfortable are they with computers? Are you going to have to be training them on how to use the job aid? She also recommends thinking about, what makes them laugh, what makes them angry. That can really help you get them to engage with the content, and it can also help make sure that you are not, accidentally triggering them to not engage with your content. And of course, you need to think about the safety that you need to include in the job aid. So that's really important for knowing who your audience is, and that's another tenet of marketing where I'll mention a few times where marketing and training have a lot in common, because we're both trying to drive humans to take action. We're often going about different actions, but a lot of the principles are the same. So it's important to know who your audience is and what motivates them and what context are they going to be receiving this job aid. And then a job aid is usually supporting a specific task. So you also want to think about, what is the task? Is it a complex task that they also need to understand 5 other tasks in order to do it? Is there a priority to this task or the other tasks? How long does it take? How hard is it? Is it supporting a specific piece of equipment? Is there other equipment they need in order to achieve the task? So for example, going back to the Sales Pocket Guide, you want them to have it on their desk, but you also have to think about where's their phone and, where's their computer and where's everything that they're using, and making sure that it is in a place where they can use it. And are they working with anyone else to complete the task? If you're setting them up with a job aid that makes them a lone island, but they actually need to be working with 10 other people, then the job aid might fail them and not be as effective as it could be. So all of that is, around keeping your job aid relevant, understanding the context in which your learner is going to be consuming it, and just making sure that it's effective from that perspective. If you want to take a moment, think about that job aid that we picked out at the beginning and think about, is it relevant now? Who is the audience that's using it? Are you providing it to them at the time of the task? Are you providing it to them ahead of time? Is it answering all of the questions that you need to answer for them? Is it covering all of the parts of the task they need to know? Just think about that and whether there's any room for improvement in terms of keeping your job aid relevant. Next, I called this Make It Pretty. It's kind of facetious. You don't need it to be pretty, but you do want your job aid to be visually effective. I think that's also important for job aids in particular, because job aids, as opposed to like if you're doing a training manual or something that's like kind of like a longer piece of content, job aids are often trying to cram as much information as you can into something that someone can reference easily. So it's usually a shorter piece of content, whether it's one-sheeter, an index card, maybe even just like a pop-up on the screen that's saying, hey, this is how you do XYZ. So if you're making it small, you've got to be very efficient and effective with your visual design. So I'm going to launch into this section with the caveat that I am not a trained graphic designer, but in my role as a marketer, I have learned a lot about graphic design, and I also worked with my graphic design friends and the internet to corroborate and get better sources for all of this section. So it's kind of gospel graphic design principles. I'm not, necessarily teaching you anything that's a bad practice. And all of these references are, again, available on that handout. So they're all really great blogs, so you can kind of go down that rabbit hole if you want to build up your graphic design skills through these. So I'm going to share 5 principles of visual design that will really help make sure that your graphics are effective. Again, we're not necessarily creating art here, but we are making sure that the text or content or infographics that you're sharing are effective. So the first principle is scale. You want to make sure that you use scale to draw the eye to what is the most important part of your content. So I think it's important to note that there's big, there's little. If you look at the left-hand side, which is the good example, there's only 2 sizes of scale. So you're not necessarily going crazy with like 7 different sizes. You have one big size and you have one small size. This is actually pretty easy to accomplish in basic, content things like Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever you're using, word processors or slides or, non-designer technology where you're creating content. It's pretty easy to get because most of them come with pre-made headings. So whatever font you choose, there's going to be heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4, and those are all going to be different sizes. So I usually just try to choose, okay, for my headings, I'm going to use heading 2, and for my text, I'm going to use paragraph, and that gives me the scale between the size of my fonts without needing to overthink it. And then the next principle I want to cover, if my slides will advance, is to choose a color palette. I think we've all seen things that have way too many colors. And it comes from a good place where you want to use color to draw contrast and to draw the eye in one place. But if you go overboard, then it just kind of becomes a lot of colorful noise. So I recommend choosing a color palette, and it's, again, something that's pretty easy to do. And this is a screenshot from Google, the Google Suite. This is actually a Google Sheet. So even when you're doing spreadsheets, you can choose color palettes. They kind of come with pre-made color palettes. So a lot of times I'll just go down that row and I'll use, light purple for, less important things and dark purple for more important things. And they're all in the same family of colors, so there's no clashing. And this is the same type of color palette you can find in the Microsoft Suite. This is an example from a solution called Canva, where they kind of come with recommended color palettes, and also you can save brand color palettes. So you just create a color palette once, and then from there you always have your color palette. And if you want help choosing your color palette, this is a list of different color palette generators. So I think it's 10 different color palette generators. So you can go down that rabbit hole and choose your favorite color palette generator. But it's relatively easy these days to get support in choosing a color palette. The important thing is to choose it and then use it. And we have an on-demand webinar on our site called Advanced PowerPoint for Trainers, where Gus Prestera talks about how to use color palettes when you're building training presentations in PowerPoint. So if you want to learn a little bit about that, you can check that out. The next principle is to use contrast. So without having any idea what the message is here, I can tell that they want me to pay attention to that guy in the center if I'm looking at the graphic on the right. if I'm looking at the graphic on the left, like he doesn't really stand out to me. I kind of have to like look harder in a Where's Waldo type situation to be like, oh, that one in the center is raising his hands. So using contrast, this is an example of color contrast. I think scale kind of goes hand in hand with this, where scale is an example of contrast because you have a big type of text and then a small type of text. And scale, by the way, is not limited to text. It's just often what we in the training world are dealing with. But using contrast in terms of color, in terms of size, is really important to draw the eye where you actually want it to go, and tell the story visually so that you don't necessarily need as much text. And again, these links are available in that handout, so be sure to download it if you want to, read these blog posts. And then in terms of font, you want to be sure to use fonts that match with each other. So there's this principle of font pairing where you might use one font for the heading and then another font for the text, and it helps to draw the eye and kind of create that contrast so that your eye can understand where to go. This is an example of where, again, you can use Google Docs, you can use Microsoft Word to choose fonts. You can save fonts so that once you do it, that's fine. If you're using something like Canva, they even come up with fonts for you, so they'll suggest the different fonts, or if you use a template, it just kind of populates the 3 different fonts. So in this example, you can see that Canva, if you're using a template, they usually give you a font for the heading, which is a bigger type. They use a subheading, and oftentimes that's the same font, but it's smaller, and then they do a body text, and that's usually a separate font and a smaller size. So again, there are lots of solutions out there to help you pick your font pairs so that you don't need to be like, I don't know what pairs. There's the whole concept of serif versus sans serif. Serif is when the fonts have like little like doodads hanging off of the edges of the letters, whereas sans serif is kind of like a clean picture. Sometimes you want to pair those, sometimes you don't. So you can use these font pairing tools that are available online to choose the fonts that work for you. And again, this link is in the handouts. And then it's important to pay attention to spacing. And again, this becomes really important when we're doing things like one-sheeters or tiny little, job aids. It's important to think about, are there too many elements on the page? Are they all aligned relative to each other, or do you have like the different boxes kind of just like not aligned and like in a jumble all over the page? Are they too close together? The example on the screen is a font example, or the text example, but you also want to make sure that all of the elements, whether it's visual or text or even white space, are properly balanced so that the eye knows where to go and is not overwhelmed by too much. And I think it's important to think about, is there text that you can shorten or eliminate, especially if you're doing a small piece, so that you're not jamming too much? Because ultimately, we all have attention spans of about 3 seconds. So if your learner is like, I can't find what I need on here, it's not going to be an effective job aid. So let's pause again and think about that job aid that we chose at the beginning. How is it designed? Do you think there's room for improvement in terms of scale, or color palette, or contrast, or font pairing, or spacing? Or do you think it's fine, but you need to improve it in terms of relevancy? These are just some things to keep thinking about. As we move on, I almost forgot. My favorite part is recommending tools. So these are all free except for PowerPoint, which, depending on your organization, you might have. These are my favorite design tools that I use as a non-designer. So PowerPoint, I'm specifically calling out PowerPoint because it is a lot more powerful in terms of design than Google Slides. I used to be a conference producer before I worked at Mimeo, and I used to build out our one-sheets and our workbooks entirely in PowerPoint because it's a lot easier to work from a design perspective than Word. In Word, things get anchored and like you can never quite get the image and the words to wrap properly, and it's like this huge headache. But PowerPoint is actually, you don't even need to create a PowerPoint with it. You can use it as a design tool. You just kind of change it to be whatever finishing size you need. So you can change it to be an 8.5 by 11, and then you can group things, you can shade things, you can move text boxes around. It's definitely a lot better than Word. So that's my first recommendation for upping your design game. Next is Canva, which you can either get a free version of or a pro version, and the pro version is under $1,000 a year. Canva comes with all sorts of templates for designing. So you can say like, oh, I need to do a one-page 8.5 by 11, or I need to do a name tag, or whatever it is that you're trying to design. You can start by seeing if they have a template, and then even if they don't have a template for your use case, like I don't know if they have one for job aid. If you put that in, you can create the document size that you need. So let's say 8.5 by 11. And then they have all sorts of photos you can use, shapes you can use, backgrounds you can use, font pairings you can use. It's really easy. It's my favorite thing to do. It's drag and drop. You don't need to be a designer to understand how to use it. And then if you're doing any videos, I like to recommend Powtoon. It's really good if you're doing like animations or custom illustrations on your videos. They also have some basic stock footage that's like no more than 10 seconds long, so it's not great if you're trying to do like an e-learning scenario, but it is good if you're trying to do a little bit more color in your videos that's kind of showing someone maybe handing a document to somebody or walking on a construction site. So I definitely recommend checking that out. They do have a free version, and then there's a pretty affordable version if you want to take their Powtoon logo off of it. So those are my favorite recommendation tools if you're a non-designer like me, trying to live in a design world. All right, so now the final secret, presentation matters. So we talked about the importance of understanding the context of your learner. It also is important to understand how they're going to consume the job aid. So again, Connie has a really great environmental analysis question list that you can use. So you want to think about, first of all, are you giving this job aid when you're training them, or at the end of the training, or when they're actually just going to be at the job? If it's during training, where are you going to be training them? And then how do you expect them to take it and bring it to their work? So the example of our sales team has, the pocket guide of conversations. They received that during their training on how to run conversations, but then they're expected to take it back to their desk and put it somewhere that they will remember. However, for the job aids that are standing at our print facility stations, those are topics that are covered during training, but the job aids are just permanently at those workstations so that whoever is working the workstation can refer to it. It's not dependent on the learner bringing it with them. And then you also want to think, I think one of the really important things here is what kind of technology will they have access to. So deciding whether it is a digital asset or a printed asset. I think it's important also if you're doing print to think about what kind of environment it's going to be from like durability. So a lot of our restaurant customers are using, laminated, or we have a synthetic stock that we call polypaper that's tear-proof and waterproof. So they use that in the back of house because, they have safety posters or, reminders on how to clean the sink or, all of that sort of thing that in a restaurant environment can get really beaten up really fast. So you have to think about, the life of that job aid and how is it going to be presented to the learner. And then I think it's always important to think about if you are asking a learner to pay attention to something you're providing them, what psychology can you use to trick them into remembering that this is an important piece of document? So just kind of like a basic example here is like if you received a crumpled up piece of paper, you'd be less likely to pay attention to it. You might think it's trash. Whereas if you present them with the job aid in a personalized folder that has the date of the training, they're more likely to be impressed with that, to pay attention to it, to feel that it's a professional piece of material that they need to do their job. So it's important to think about where is the job aid going to live and how are you going to position it so that your learners will pay attention to it. So those are my 3 secrets for designing effective job aids. We have keep it relevant. We have make it pretty, and from there you got the 5 principles of visual design. So really, I'm kind of giving you 6 secrets. And then there's the thinking about the presentation. So we set the intention at the beginning where you all thought about a job aid that you wanted to improve. So now you can type it into the question pane, or you can kind of just hold it in your mind or write it down for yourself. But think back on that job aid. How are you going to improve it from here? And if you care to share it with the question pane, I'd love to read some of those responses out loud. But I'm going to leave that up to you guys and how comfortable you are sharing it. We are doing a session at ATD Tech Knowledge. I don't know if anyone's going to that, but we're going to be speaking more broadly about training handouts, but we're going to actually be giving some training handouts a makeover and then talking through what that makeover looks like. So if you want to keep learning about that, I'm sure we will be doing some sort of blog post around that, showing you real life examples. So my question is really, how are you going to give your job aids a makeover? So with that, those are the 3 secrets. I hope that you found it helpful, and I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. If you are interested in printing with Mimeo, we do have a promo code for you, but if you're not, no worries there either. So now, Alexa, let's take some questions.
Great, thanks, Katie. So participants, any questions you might have, feel free to send them in the questions panel box and we will be able to address them. Katie, I am seeing one from one of our participants. What type of job aid is of value for someone who has a cell phone and works in the field?
That's a great question. So I think it's important to think about, what are you supporting? So, are you supporting a salesperson who's working in the field or someone who's in the oil rig? So the job aid would need to tie back to whatever the topic is, but there are lots of solutions out there that are very mobile friendly. I'll stay agnostic, although Mimeo does have one, but you can just, there are solutions that will tie into your LMS, or it can be kind of one-off. You can think about, how much time will they have? So do you want to give them a video that they can watch? That's one of the great things about mobile, is that most people can do kind of multimedia. Or do you want it to be more of a, text-based thing? If it's text-based, I would think about, you could convert a printed version of what you have into a PDF and make that available to them. But I think it's important to find a solution that would make it mobile friendly, so that, probably you've all had the experience of going on a website that's not mobile friendly, and so like the menus are all messed up and you can't quite read all of the text without scrolling to the right. And it's similar if you're just distributing a PDF that you're opening, as a file, you often can't see it as easily. But if you find a mobile-friendly provider, then it will automatically convert that PDF to be mobile-friendly, so that if they're opening it on their cell phone or on their tablet, it will adjust for the size of the screen and make it really easy for them to consume. So I feel like I rambled a little bit on that, but I guess the short answer is it's definitely possible to give job aids to people who have cell phones, and I think it's all about finding a mobile solution that fits the the content that you want to get in their hands. That was a great question. Thank you.
Katie, another question. Could you speak a little bit into your potential recommendations within different industry types or career paths in terms of either design tips for certain industries, or maybe do's and don'ts that you found in your experience? So are there in a certain industry type, is there a certain recommended type of job aid, or do you have any advice industry depending? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely is going to depend on which industry you're in and what your learning population is. So, I think the financial services is an example of an industry that is heavily regulated. So you're going to want to pay attention to what your company's regulations are in terms of, sometimes you're not able to provide mobile solutions there because of cyber security compliance issues. And then on the other hand, manufacturing industry, which has a lot of OSHA training that needs to be done, in manufacturing, there's a lot of use case for job aids because people are operating heavy machinery and they need, kind of references for what they're doing. And a lot of times manufacturing is still very print-based because there's a lot of, kind of like on the field work where they don't have mobile devices or they don't have computers. So it's definitely important to keep in mind your learning population. In terms of design, I think that's more of a brand question than an industry question. I think, again, financial services brands tend to have pretty specific ways that you can use their logos and the colors that you can use and brand voice, and so you probably don't want to stray too far from that. Whereas if you're doing customer training in the SaaS world, you might have a lot more leeway to be fun and do kind of more cheeky designs.
Great, thanks so much.
Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you.
Well, if anyone does have more questions after the presentation, you can feel free to reach out to me at kflanagan@mimeo.com, or you can just go to mimeo.com and start a chat with us. The chat operators sit next to me and they'll forward it on over to me. We are going to do a follow-up blog post that kind of sums this up. You can download the handouts if you haven't already, that has basically the summary of everything you need to know and all the links to everything that I was sharing.
Great, thanks so much, Katie. And I wanted to thank you for taking the time to deliver such an informative presentation for us today. I think that you gave us a lot of information to mull over and to really think through in terms of what that means for our own jobs and designing our own job aids. So thanks again for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thanks everyone for joining.
Absolutely. And just to wrap it up, on the IASET side of things, be sure to visit our website to see what other exciting events we have to offer. We have some workshops and some events already on the schedule, but there are many more to come for 2020. So be sure to visit iaset.org to learn more and register. And as always, if you have any remaining questions or comments, or you would like a copy of some more materials, feel free to contact Katie via the email on the screen. And once again, we wanted to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We hope you found this added value to your professional experience. And as always, please don't hesitate to contact the IASET office. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.